Hello respected viewers, I'm George from Ireland. Here I am in London on Pall Mall. Behind me is the Travellers Club, that brown door with a flagpole near it. So this is really the last place in London Donald MacLean was before he defected. This video is about Donald MacLean. So it was the 25th of May 1951, which happened to be his birthday. And he was working in the Foreign Office. So he followed his usual routine, going to work, going for luncheon, cashing a cheque for £10 there, not clear why. Did he need the cash for something? Or was it to keep up the pretense of maintaining his routine? Or was he just going to leave some cash for his wife Melinda, who was intending to leave behind here in the United Kingdom? So let's rewind. So MacLean was born in London to Scots parents in 1913. And his father was active in the Liberal Party. They were an upper middle class family, and his father was elected to Parliament for the constituency of Cornwall North. And the Liberal Party was then the second biggest party. Well, sorry, I should say no, actually the biggest, the governing party. The Conservative and Unionist Party was smaller, Labour was much smaller, but that was about to change drastically in his adolescence. So he had a number of siblings, he had a fairly happy childhood, and he was living in a very political household which had plenty of books. So his father was knighted, was Sir Donald MacLean. So our Donald MacLean, the son, he went to a public school in Norfolk called Gresham's, which was rather forward-thinking for its time, wasn't so much into muscular Christianity. The few well-known people who went there were all leftists. And from there he went up to Trinity Hall, Cambridge in 1931. So Trinity Hall is one of his colleges. It's not Trinity College, that's a different one in Cambridge. And he was reading French and German, so he had an extraordinary flair for languages. Of course, he'd learned French at school, but classics had been his main grounding at school. And the Great Depression had begun a couple of years earlier, and he was aware that he was privileged. He was much better off than most. Norfolk was not a particularly wealthy area of the country. Here in London, obviously, the gap between rich and poor, well, was an enormous gulf. And in Cambridge, the undergraduates usually came from upper middle class family, but there were some working class people in Cambridge who were really suffering. So he was aware of the penury amount around him, and he felt a bit guilt-stricken about that. So his politics moved steadily leftward. His father had died shortly before MacLean had gone up to Cambridge. So his mother was bemused by his political antics. So first of all, joining the Socialist Society at Cambridge, and eventually proclaiming himself to be a Marxist, publishing articles in various left-wing publications in Cambridge and elsewhere. So he was a very clever chap, spent a year abroad to perfect his French and German, and having graduated, he promptly joined the Foreign Office. And the Foreign Office was all very plummy and chummy back then, and they didn't do their homework on people. Obviously, the Soviet Union was a sworn enemy of the United Kingdom and of the British Empire, which was then extant. But they didn't bother to do any even elementary checks to see, is this chap politically suspect? Is he openly sympathising with a vicious totalitarian oppressor which is sworn to destroy us? So he rose up the ranks, and just within a few years he was appointed to the British Embassy in Paris. He was third secretary, as in the third highest person, and that was out of a staff of dozens. Some of them were mere clerical staff. And he was been an agent of the Soviet intelligence since 1934, and in Paris, Moscow's spiritual home, he was happily handing them over reams of highly sensitive documents, so that the NKVD knew precisely what was going on in Germano-British relations in the run-up to the Second World War, about the inner workings of the Munich negotiations and so forth. So MacLean was there in Paris when Ernst von Rath, a German diplomat, was shot dead by Herschel Greenspan, a Polish Jew who was outraged by the mistreatment of his parents in Germany. Anyway, so he was posted to other places during the war, MacLean. Obviously couldn't stay in Paris after June 1940 for reasons one might guess. He was in Egypt, and latterly he was in the United States. Egypt being a sovereign country then, although the British Army was stationed there. So he was in the United States from 1944 onwards, and it was an important part of the aspiring there. He kept the Soviets apprised of American developments in thermonuclear warfare technology. So he married an American named Melinda, and they were blessed with a brood of 3. So he was good friends of Guy Burgess, the notorious spy. Guy Burgess was a very, how to put it, flamboyant homosexual, roaring alcoholic and so on. MacLean was rather more respectable and conventional in his conduct. But Philby had actually shared a house with Guy Burgess for a while to try and keep his behaviour under control, although Philby was a big piss artist. So MacLean was one of the Cambridge spies, so just name 3 of them. And Anthony Blunt was another one, and then there's obviously the other one, oh my god, his name escapes me right now, but John Cairncross. So they'd all been at Cambridge, they're all roughly the same age. Blunt is the oldest, born 1907, if memory serves, and so MacLean, born 1913, is the youngest. Anyway, they say there was an Oxford spy ring as well, but they were never unmasked, which is why we haven't heard about them. So by the late 1940s, something appeared to be up. In 1949, how did the Soviets develop nuclear weapons in only 4 years of trying? It had taken Western countries well over a decade. And there were other things. Western attempts to put anti-communist agents into Eastern Europe always going awry. As soon as you parachuted one in, there'd be a whole battalion there waiting for him to give him a very warm welcome. It's because people like Burgess and MacLean and Philby were tipping off the Soviets and the other communist regimes. So something had to be done about it, and some defectors from the Soviet side said, yes, we have agents inside the British Foreign Office and so on. And the British Foreign Office was looking into it, getting MI5, that's the UK's internal intelligence agency, to examine this, and realising who it was. The list of people, who's a possible suspect, who fits the details we've got. Son of a senior politician, educated at Cambridge, a linguist. There weren't that many people who fitted the bill. Who would have had access to the sort of intelligence that was passed on? So by early 1951, the suspicion was very much on these few. And so Guy Burgess became aware of this in early May 1951. He came back here to London, but they were going to be questioned. He tipped off MacLean, but he realised that he better run away too. Initially was to tell MacLean, you need to leave. But Burgess decided to go himself as well. We're not quite sure if it's a last-minute decision or not. And so they talked loudly in the Travellers Club about their plan for a weekend motoring in Scotland. And it was a Thursday, their last day here. He'd taken Friday off. He returned to the office after lunch, had a productive afternoon's work, said loudly to his colleagues, remember, I've got tomorrow off, as in not to be surprised if he didn't show up at work till Friday morning, so he wouldn't be missed to Monday. So he drove home. Burgess came around. They had a good slap-up feed. He kissed his wife a fond farewell, got in their car and motored to Southampton. And they bought themselves a ticket to France on the ferry. They left the car there, saying they'd come back on Monday. They promptly got a taxi to another town, whence they caught the train to Paris, from where they caught another train to Switzerland. In Zurich, they flew to Prague. By the time they crossed into what was then Czechoslovakia, they were inside the Soviet zone. They were behind the Iron Curtain, so they were safe and could travel on to Moscow. So on Monday, that mid-morning, there was a cheery phone call from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to Mrs. MacLean. Do you know where your husband is? Because he hadn't shown up to work and hadn't called in sick. So they're missing diplomats for a while. It wasn't until 1956 it was publicly confirmed that they were in the Soviet Union. They could have been dead, they could have been kidnapped, or what, they could have been in this country. Nobody knew. But I mean, pretty soon after they'd gone, the MI6 and MI5 realised something was up, and they brought in other people, aggressively interrogated them, including Kim Philby, their colleague. Kim Philby was required to resign from the Foreign Office, as he said, for an imprudent association. So MacLean lived out the rest of his life in Moscow. He persuaded his wife and children to join him. When he defected, his wife was 8 months pregnant. It was one of the reasons why the authorities went easy on her and didn't question her too aggressively. But she then started having an affair with Kim Philby. MacLean himself started drinking quite heavily. But apart from that, apparently he's fairly happy in Russia. And he acquired mastery of the language because, of course, he was blessed with an exceptional facility for languages. And he was helpful to the authorities. He was their expert on British affairs, working in various government ministries, briefly teaching at a city called Samara, or Khubishev, as it was known in the Soviet era. He died in 1983. His children lived with him all the time, and they all married Russians, but they all left to the West later on, because remember, they're British and American citizens, his children. But he went there at the time of Stalin, 1951. So suspicion easily could have fallen on him. He was a double agent. The Soviets couldn't quite believe their luck. They didn't think that the British was just so amateurish, such dunces, as to make it so easy to steal absolutely tons of intelligence. That's why they never quite trusted them, particularly Philby. Anyway, that's enough from me, so please subscribe to my channel. Here we are in the St James's area of London, or Clubland, where the most distinguished and exclusive private members clubs are. like the Travellers Club I just mentioned. Is it the Reform Club just down there, the Royal Automobile Club? They're all in a line, and the Oxford and Cambridge Club around the corner. You see the side of it is the Athenaeum. Okay, so the Travellers Club is for those who travel. It was founded by 1820. Mainly for those who travel more than 500 miles out of London. It's not for what in Ireland we call travellers, it's in that highly mobile indigenous ethnic minority community. Of course, in 1820, travelling 500 miles was a much more difficult prospect than it is today. So that's why they had a special club for them. All right, toodaloo.